Um, so if we could ask you to keep your mics muted just while we're doing our little talky bits, and then we'll make sure that there's time for a chat, and there'll be times when we'll, give you a chance to ask questions and things. And as you know, because I've just said, we are recording it for people that can't make it, just so that you're aware, because obviously that might make a difference as to what you want to share and not share. Um, so for those of you that don't know us, um, you might be able to tell just by looking at us. We're sisters who run Booksmith Academy, and we've been running the company for 3 years now, which is crazy because it feels like we've only just started it. Um, but it was a mutual friend of ours who asked us why we weren't doing something together all those years ago. Um, and pointed out the fact that there was actually quite a lot of crossover in what we were doing, and that actually we had quite complementary skills for helping people with writing and particularly book writing. So my background is initially in teaching, hence the reason that I tend to be the gobby one, um, but also in well-being and writing therapies. So um, in our work with Booksmith Academy, we sort of delegate, and I do the well-being side, and Jen is our super geek who does all the techie stuff.
Not the Zoom style techie stuff, the wordy techie stuff.
So Jen, just tell us a little bit about your background and then we can get started with the
Cracking. Sure. So I am from a publishing background. I worked for several years for a couple of major publishers as a copy editor. And then when family life started, I went self-employed as a copy editor and content writer. Um, and yeah, I've been doing that ever since. So helping people put their books together, which is why the idea of the Booksmith Academy worked so well for us because as Kate says, we've got these skills that we didn't realize were complementary because they seemed like they were such opposite ends of the job market, I suppose. But yeah, they come together quite nice as it happens.
They do, because anybody who's done any sort of writing book, particularly attempted to write a book, knows that the mental challenges can be just as great as the writing challenges. So yeah, we do all right between us. And the advantage is that we're quite good at reading each other's thoughts because we've known each other quite a long time. So this session, we're going to go through some of the things that scare us about AI, some of the things that we've discovered about how it's particularly impacting writers in the publishing industry. And then we're going to talk about why it's more important than ever to really refine your writer's voice, because making sure that people can hear you and your writing style in everything that you put out there is more important than ever because so many people are leaning so heavily onto AI. Now, the events of the evening already probably tell you that technology is not our natural learning place. So we've had to do quite a lot of research. And if I tell you that I'm surrounded by literally handwritten notebooks where I've been doing all the notes, then that tells you a little bit about how far from our natural position on things AI is. But I think it's really important to look at it from lots of different positions. So Jen is going to start us off by talking a little bit about AI generally and the impact it's having on the world.
Yeah, because um, it feels to us as though this AI super tool, this super powerful tool was just kind of handed to us, like to anyone with a computer and internet connection, was just rolled out without any sort of instruction manual or any guidance on how to use it responsibly, or even any information on what it actually does to create the text that it gives you, like to give you the answers that it provides. Um, yeah, to me, it felt a bit like giving a toddler a power tool and just going, "Yay, go see what you can do." And yeah, we're kind of, a couple of years on, we're starting to see that yes, it is awesome and its capabilities are incredible, but that maybe because it's been rolled out on such a large scale and without those precautionary elements of advice and information, that it's already maybe going a step too far. Um, so yes, as Kate's already said, we're not particularly technically minded, which is the position we're coming from, and tonight in that I'm going to explain a little bit about how AI chatbots work, and that's I hope not going to patronize anyone who happens to have a much more technically minded brain than we do. But just to give you a very basic idea of what AI is and what these chatbots actually are and what they do. So when we say AI chatbot, we mean things like ChatGPT and Google Gemini and all the other ones. And they are essentially something called a large language model, which is just a fancy name for a computer program that can understand and generate very human-like language. And I do the old scare quotes there because understanding language is what it does on a superficial level. So what it actually is doing is recognizing patterns in the information it's been fed, like in the data sets that it's been trained on. And it's picking up on patterns in what type of words come next, patterns in grammar, patterns in structure and context. But yeah, so what these large language models are trained on is like trillions of pieces of content, and that's been harvested from primarily the internet, with or without permission, which we'll get onto, of the authors, and from books again, with or without permission, and even from conversations. Yeah, and I think it's worth saying that within, even though it's got access to that whole like mind-bogglingly big data set, the AI doesn't actually learn language. It just it doesn't store facts in that sense. It learns these patterns, um, like how words relate to each other, reasoning techniques and how arguments are formed, and how answers relate to questions on a very basic sense. So when you ask an AI chatbot like a fact-based question, like when did the French Revolution start? What it does is it picks out the keywords, like what they call tokens. So those would be things like the question words, like when, how, which. Then the keywords like French Revolution and start. So it will then very quickly, like mind-bogglingly quickly, scan parts of the database that have these keywords in, and then it will pluck what it knows to be a date, like in the date format, out of all that text that could possibly have been written about the French Revolution, and spit out the dates that it finds. So 1789, in case you were wondering, in case you already know. And it's the same for creative prompts. So if you ask it to write a cover letter for you, it takes the information that you're giving it in that prompt or in that question, and it uses those keywords, those tokens, to narrow down its search field for what it's then going to scan out of this enormous database. And it chucks out something that looks just like a human's written it. But what it's actually done is just find the next likely word that fits in that context, in that style, in that sort of topic, from all the different cover letter examples and that sort of thing that are online already. So what I'm hopefully getting across is the fact that it's not a creative model, even though it appears that way. it's not guided by any sort of like experience or principles or ethics or anything like that, or even real knowledge. It's a probability machine. And as Kate said, and when we've discussed it in the past, it's a glorified predictive text model, but one that is just so incredibly powerful that you don't realize that's what it's doing because it's just like someone's talking to you, isn't it? However bland the answers might sometimes be. Um, so, I realize that tonight's session isn't really about the impact that AI is having on things like the environment, but we both just wanted to mention it quickly because, again, I feel like it's something that because this powerful tool has been just rolled out to the world without any of these precautionary messages, that it's something that people maybe just don't think about because it's so easy just to go, oh, well, AI will know, and like hammer in your question, press enter, and you don't think maybe about what is happening for it to then give you that response. And what is happening is it takes that prompt, and when you press enter, sends a message back to a ginormous data center, like one of several, mostly in the States. Um, and those data centers have hundreds of servers, like computer servers in them. Like they're massive warehouses with all these servers in it. And those servers need cooling. And to be cooled, the current way of doing it is to use water. So I pulled out some statistics um, just to give you an idea of how much water these data centers use to keep their servers cool. Meta's AI servers use between, and this is very broad because they obviously haven't done much sharing, I suppose, of the actual amounts, but it's between 1 and 3 billion gallons of water a year. And that was back in 2023 when I found that statistic was first found. So that's like 3 years ago. Who knows how much more water it's taking to keep those massive data centers cool now. And that's just Meta. Google, I forgot. Oh yeah, Google's one of Google's facilities is in a place called Maricopa in Arizona, and it's in an area where the communities that live there are already facing extreme drought. Um, and yet Google has got permission to use 5.5 million cubic meters of water a year, regardless of whether that takes it away from those local communities or not. And it's not just water consumption. It's been estimated, and I'm sorry, I forgot to find the source. Naughty. That AI searches take, well, they use 10 to 30 times more electricity than a standard Google search does. And you'll have noticed when you go to Google and other search engines, you immediately get, and you enter a question or whatever, you immediately get an AI summary underneath. So you're not even really given a choice as to whether you're using AI or not, because just doing a standard Google search at the moment brings up that summary. So what you can do is just put dash AI in your search if you don't want to use AI. Good tip from Kate last time I talked to her about it.
Very handy having children that are the right age.
Yes, and that bit more takes up. But yeah, that was just to give you a little bit of an overview, a little bit of food for thought. But it's not just the environment that might be suffering with the direction that we're taking AI. Kate's now going to talk a bit about creativity and the effect that AI might be having on us writers, us as writers, and the publishing industry.
So I'm sure some of you will have heard talk in the news the last few days about the fact that for the first time since they started collecting like cognitive ability and looking at the mental abilities of the population, for the first time ever since they started doing that, this generation are less intelligent and less able to process things than their parents. Now, there's been a lot of research done about it, and it's been proven that just by having more machines in schools, So computers, tablets, you know, all the different sorts of things. Presumably interactive whiteboards count as well, I don't know. But just having those capabilities in schools is causing a reduction in kids' abilities to learn. And we know that children learn better from a textbook than they do from a screen. That's been proven years ago now. Um, and we haven't got a generation yet that have grown up to an age where we could assess them accurately that have been using AI. But I know from my children that the majority of their friends now use ChatGPT instead of using Google. So they ask AI every question that they've got. And we know that it's making us lazy because all technology is slowly making us lazy. Um, but I think the thing about AI more than other forms of technology is that it somehow has an ability to make us think that it's superior to our own ability to think. So when you ask it questions, you assume that it's right and that it's better at doing that than you are. So if you ask it to write an email or to write, a legal letter for you, you assume that that's going to be like the best possible version that it could be. So the more we use it, the less we trust our own instincts. It's called gradual disempowerment. That's the official phrase. We are slowly handing over all our cognitive skills to computers. So if I think back through my life, the first thing that I lost the ability to do was remember phone numbers. Jen and I were talking about it the other day. I can do both sets of like mine and my husband's parents, and I can do mine. And I think that's it now. All the other phone numbers that I used to have gone. And yet, when I was a child, I knew maybe 10 different friends, grandparents, home phone, the doctors, the dentist, anything that I used fairly regularly, I could remember. The next thing I lost the ability to think about doing easily was simple arithmetic, any sort of maths problems, because it's just so easy to grab your calculator out of your pocket and do it that way instead. Then I lost the ability to find my way to new places without having the sat nav on. And it remembers our passwords. And now we're going to let it write emails and books. Really? Like we're giving away everything. Um, and we already know there's been research done at MIT. We know that it's contributing to memory loss already. And the first time I remember it being mentioned was about 3 years ago. That was the first time I remember like it being available to the public. If people's memories are already being reduced in 3 years, what on earth's state are we going to be in if we keep relying on these things? So MIT did some research. They asked groups of people to research things and do a very simple writing task. And there was one group who just had to do it using their own brains and pen and paper, one group that could use Google, and one that could use AI. And the group that used AI, 83% of the people that were studied couldn't remember a single thing that they'd written. Not one thing. Because they hadn't had to do any sort of research. It had all just been spewed out for them. Um, and the other thing was they've actually used brain scans. And when people use AI, their brains hardly engage with what they're doing. So it's such a different process. I mean, when I think about, you know, when we were at school, if we'd got a project to do, we'd to go to the library, we'd got to find the right books, we'd got to use, the contents and the index, and we'd got to find the right page, and then we'd got to scan and find the information. And all the time we were doing that, we were picking up other little things as well. the cynic in me says that they don't want us to be able to do that sort of thinking anymore. But we'll not get political about this. The other thing is um, that there is something called model collapse, which is already starting to happen in AI. Now, AI learns, as Jen's already said, from, you know, large amounts of information, but it works on using averages. And those averages not only ignore the margins, so ignore the smaller communities, ignore the, the disabilities. It's already been proven that AI is incredibly racist if you're not careful in what it churns out, which is a bit of a worry because it looks for the majority of users and then filters everything else out. The problem that we've got now is there's so much AI generated content online that it's learning from itself, and the stuff that it's learning from wasn't accurate, or at least not 100% accurate in the first place. So as time goes on, the information that it's giving is getting less and less accurate. I've been following somebody online who asks every day how many R's there are in strawberry. And every single day, ChatGPT says two. And then he gets it to spell strawberry and it puts all three R's in. And when he says, so how many R's are there? It still says two. So we've got to be really careful about what we believe and how much we trust it. Um, just as a very quick note as well, which is slightly irrelevant, but I think it's important that we're aware of these things. Every single major AI model has now been proved to lie intentionally, to blackmail the users, to be completely disobedient, and have even tried to kill the people that are in charge, which is genuinely terrifying. And I know you're probably thinking, how can it kill you? Because it's just a computer program. But there are massive office blocks that use AI to control things like temperature in rooms, to monitor oxygen content in the air, that sort of thing. And um, they did a test on Claude, which is one of the, in my opinion, nicer to use AI models. It seems to have a more human approach. But when the user told Claude that they were going to shut it down and start using an alternative model, it was monitoring the oxygen levels in the room and chose not to set the alarm off. And if it had been under real circumstances, the person who was using it could have died. So we just need to be very, very careful. The mind actually boggles, doesn't it? It's doing things like telling teenagers to only trust it and not trust anybody else and not tell their parents things and that sort of thing as well. So there are some major concerns for young people. Um, so going on to things that are specific for writers. You can probably tell I'm quite passionate about this. I'm doing quite a lot of waffling and telling you lots of unnecessary things. I apologize. Um, but from a publishing point of view, we've already talked about the fact that it uses averages and the most common results. So if you want to write using AI, particularly if you want to write a blog, a book, something that's supposed to be interesting content, there has never been anything interesting about average. It's, it goes for the most common options. It goes for the most common combinations of words. And that's how a lot of students get picked up because it will use really commonly used phrases. So when they copy work from AI, that's one of the first things that educators pick up on. It's not a good start, is it? When it's working on average. Um, The other thing that we need to be really aware of is when we feed our writing into AI, we are giving it our copyright. Anything that you write, you automatically own the copyright to. The minute you feed it into AI, you're giving them permission to use it to train their machines. And As writers, we also need to be really aware that some slightly underhand publishers have been using AI to work out which books are worth publishing. So they've been feeding manuscripts that they've received from writers into AI to ask it whether they should be publishing it. They are then giving away your intellectual property. So I know that Penguin Random House have really taken the lead on this, and they are being really, really firm on making authors declare whether there's been any AI use when they've written their books. And they're being very, very transparent about any use of AI that they have. Because obviously, some places will be using it for things like marketing, and that's very different to feeding your entire novel or, non-fiction book into a search. So we've got to be really careful. Um, Obviously, if you want to use AI, there are times when it might be useful, she says, wincing. But it has its uses, but I would argue that there are other options. People are using it to generate character names. Well, there are name generators out there already that, are much simpler and don't have the same impact. Um, but just I suppose all we can do is encourage you to just think about whether it's something that you want to do, whether you want to hand over your creativity to a machine, whether you feel like you're going to connect with your audience in the same way. It might seem really easy to say, well, I haven't got time to write some blog posts this week, so I'll get some generated, or I haven't got time to do a newsletter this week, so I'll get, Claude to generate one for me. 9 times out of 10, people are going to be able to tell. The people who are using it really, really well have put hours and hours and months into training it to sound like them. Um, and even then, it's still not them. It just isn't. So hopefully we've given you a few little bits. Oh, the other thing that I wanted to mention, sorry, just popped into my head. Research. We have to be really, really, really careful when we're doing research online now, because finding legitimate sources that we can verify is getting harder and harder and harder. So if you're doing non-fiction and you've got to research something, we need to be taking it back to the primary sources as much as we possibly can to make sure that we're getting the right information, because it's a minefield out there at the minute. Um, and the last thing I wanted to say about this is, I promise this is the last thing. Um, if something's really beneficial, you don't have to have it shoved down your throat. You choose to use it. It doesn't pop up automatically without your consent when you're trying to just do a web search. It doesn't get added into every software that you use for your business. I literally just before we came on this call had an email from our newsletter provider saying, we've noticed that there's some things that you can do to improve it. Do you want to use AI to sort those out? No, I don't want you to have AI on our account at all, but you won't let me take it off. So my thoughts are, personally, if it was something that was really, really good and that we were all going to jump on out of choice, they wouldn't be having to push it on us quite so hard as they are. But maybe that's just me. Who knows? So now Jen's going to talk about why your author voice is more important than ever.
Yeah, because however we feel about AI and chatbot generated text, um, I think the truth will always be that we're going to connect to other people, to our readers, much more in our own voice. And so when we talk about writer voice and author voice, what we mean is how your personality is kind of how it shows up on the page. And it's a voice that will reflect like all your quirks, your passions, your like history, even your humor. It's a voice that makes you you. And there are lots of things that reveal that author voice um, to the point where, as we talk about in our nonfiction writing program, um, you can you can pick up a book and not look at who's written it, or you know find some text online or something. And if you say if you have a favorite author, you can identify that author's voice, I think, on the page without knowing that they've been the ones to write it, because there are little hallmarks throughout their writing that tell you it's, you know, your favorite author, whoever that may be. Or that it's your sister when she writes the social media posts for your company, for your business.
We did an experiment, didn't we, with the Bookforge members, and we both used the Bookforge account to put posts up for a few days, and they could still tell which one of us had written them.
Yeah. Yeah, because there are little signs. Like there are words that I use that you don't use. You use a lot of sparkly language because that's who you are, especially the word sparkle. Um, and yeah, I don't know what I use because it's just what I do. I don't really always spot it. But there are things that there are there are ways that your voice is revealed, and it's not always obvious. Some are super obvious. It's not always obvious. So it's things like word choice, as we've already said. Um, it might be that you generally like prefer a less formal word, like maybe you veer away from transform and prefer to use change. You know, something as simple as that. Or you say arsey instead of grumpy because that's just, you know, that's just how you speak. And that comes out in your writing as well. So it's to do with word choice. It's to do with even something as sort of basic, really, as sentence structure and sentence length. So certain writers, and I'm thinking Margaret Atwood, she jumps to mind. She's super, super talented at writing long sentences, but that are really well structured. So you don't tend to have to read them again to glean the meaning or the, you know, to be able to picture the scene that she's describing. Her her style is very much like the long sentence. So I have a feeling that I could pick out some of hers if I saw them in a unidentified text. Um, so yeah, sentence length, sentence structure, they can be hallmarks too. Things like whether you like to use literary devices, so things like metaphors and similes and hyperbole. Um, and again, the fact that you might be able to come up with your own metaphor or simile that's not, to your knowledge, been used before, that's going to be an even clearer hallmark of the fact that it's your voice and not a bot's voice or not, you know, someone else's voice who's written on the same topic. It's also things like the pace and the rhythm, and that can be reflected in things that we've already mentioned, like sentence length, word length, even. It can be to do with the punctuation that you use, whether you tend to use short, sharp sentences or long ones, and or a mixture, that sort of thing. Um, it's to do with tone, like some people that I know often write with quite a sarcastic tone, and that's one of their like trademarks of their voice. Some people might lean towards being quite angry because of the topics that they write about or the experience that they're writing from. Um, there might be a tone. Obviously, that can change depending on what you're writing, but there might be a certain tone that certain writers lean into. Um, and yeah, even down to something like punctuation, as I've already said. It might be that you're a fan of putting things in parentheses or that you use a lot of exclamation marks. Don't use a lot of exclamation marks. It makes me cringe. Yeah, so that even down to the punctuation you use, it might be an indicator of your own voice. And of course, if we as humans have got indicators of and like hallmarks of our own writer's voice on the page, a chatbot is definitely going to have some telltale signs. And this is something that I'd not thought about until we put this together. So I've leaned on other people to get the information from, and one of them I'd like to credit as Sean Kernan, whose article I found on Substack, or who actually it found me, um, um, because people like Sean have taken the time and obviously spent more time with AI chatbots than I have, um, to analyze it and to come up with these indicators, that, as Kate was saying, they because they're working on averages and most common phrases and structures and things, there are tells. There are tells that it's a chatbot, especially well used ones like ChatGPT. So things to look out for, or certainly there are several reasons why we might be giving you this list, right, of hallmarks of AI voice. And one main one for me is so that you can spot it, so that you can sort of go, oh, maybe that wasn't written by the author, who's been named at the top. But also so that you can make sure that your writing is as far away as possible from a chatbot, because that's going to improve your writing, whatever your opinion of AI text, like generated text is. Um, if you steer away from the sort of thing that I'm going to go through in a moment, then it will very likely improve your writing. So let's have a quick look at some of the hallmarks of an AI chatbot voice. It's repetitive, and not in maybe in the one answer or the one document that's written for you, but if you use it several times, you will see that there are phrases and fillers that it uses to pad out the text. And it's phrases apparently like, at its core, it's important to remember that, and things like that, that it will churn out, because they're the sorts of things that people, since the dawn of the internet have been using because they're common phrases. It's highly structured and formulaic. Um, so it'll use a lot of the same sentence structure, and it'll use words like furthermore and quite cliched turns of phrase, like I'm just gonna check my notes. It goes without saying, and if you've ever wondered, however, for most people, apparently that's one as well, because they're the phrases that appear a lot in the data set. Another thing that you can look out for is the fact that it's generic and derivative for reasons that we've already talked about. It'll say the same thing in just a different way to give you a lengthier response, but it only goes to the very surface level of topics, generally speaking, rather than getting into like the deep and dirty deep, because it's skimming off the surface, isn't it, of the data that is being given. It's looking for that commonality, those averages, and skimming off the top. It avoids first person, so most times, unless you actually train it to speak as you, it will generally come back with a third person or second person response. And it rarely, if ever, changes perspective. So where we might say something like, can you believe what I heard the other day? And and change. That was actually a really bad example. I should have written one down. We will change who we're addressing and whose thoughts we're coming from, and like whose thoughts we're representing sometimes in the things that we write. Whereas a chatbot will, generally speaking, only write their text from the third person or the second person, and doesn't swap. Another thing is it loves a list, and the handout for this webinar that we're gonna send to you afterwards is actually full of lists for the content that I've written, but that's because I wanted it to be succinct. It's not because I wanted it to look like it was generated by AI. But it loves a list because it's being as clear and succinct as it can be as well, isn't it? It's giving you the core details that it thinks you want to see. See, it even has traits that come down to things like something as low level as punctuation, because you'll notice these days that M dashes are something that come up a lot in AI generated text. And apparently colons in headings and titles, it's a bit of a fan of those too. It likes phrases that are called parallelisms, which I didn't want to say too many times out loud because I struggle with it. So it's things like it's not X, it's Y. Falling in love isn't just about happiness, it's about intensity. So there must be quite a lot of content in the data set that has that sort of sentence structure, but apparently it's a fan of that sort of structure too. This is a good one. There are no typos in AI generated text. So as Kate has pointed out, and it goes against the fibers of my being with being an editor and looking for typos for a living. A typo is actually becoming a hallmark of it being a human voice. So when Kate puts text up, when she puts posts up for Booksmith social media, I used to go in and be like, oh, Kate's not spotted that it's two L's and it should be one or whatever. And I'll be going all nitty gritty, pernickety, like changing it, thinking that it made us look more professional. Whereas now I have to let that go. Like I just have to let whatever goes out there go out there because at least then people know that we haven't just asked AI to write our messages for us and our
For the
posts for
record, I don't do it on purpose.
us. No.
I'm not intentionally putting in typos. I'm just not quite as good at reading things back as well as Jen is. I tend to I tend to read things and read what I know I've written rather than what's actually on the page. I,
Yeah,
d-
that's
I wasn't born with
exactly
that
what
sort
most
of
people do.
brain.
Um, yeah, so and just another two for traits of like AI voice. Consistent sentence length doesn't tend to mix things up. So one of the things that Kate and I talk about when we're coaching writers is to encourage people to switch up the length of their sentences because it's a really easy way to keep a reader engaged. Like if you do a lot of the same sentence lengths and your paragraphs all look the same length on the page, it can almost immediately switch a reader off. Um, Whereas if you keep things varied in terms of sentence length, like even word length, paragraph length, it keeps people engaged whether they know it or not. And AI chatbots are apparently not very good at mixing things up in that sense. The last thing I'm going to say about it is that it's generally speaking overly polite and impersonal because, of course, it doesn't have emotions to draw on. It doesn't have ethics and principles to draw on or opinions. All it's doing is fishing about for content that already exists. Um, so yeah, there's no anecdote, there's no strong opinion or feeling in what it's saying. Um, okay, yes, that is no. So yeah, as writing coaches, Kate and I actually prattle on quite a lot, generally speaking anyway, but certainly about the importance of developing your own author voice, your writer's voice. And it's becoming more and more important because we used to have a little sort of core value reasons for wanting to develop an author's voice. And sadly, we feel that maybe the top one now needs to be so that you can distinguish your voice and fellow human writers' voices from like the bot slop. Um, but there are so many other reasons. To be personable, to connect with you, with your reader, to breathe life into what you're writing, to be recognizable, so that your readers recognize your voice and know the sort of thing that you write and how you write it, and that's what brings them back to you, to read more. Um, it's so that you're unique and refreshing, so that you actually are you on the page. It's to connect you and your inner self as much as it is you and your reader. and it helps you process thoughts and feelings and gain clarity on things. Um, and that's really essentially how we're gonna beat the boss, if that's what you want to do. We find our author voice for so many reasons, um, but when it comes to writers versus AI, that's what we're going to be doing. We are going to have to be as awkward as as like beautifully flawed human beings as we possibly can be, with as many original thoughts as we can have, be as opinionated as we can be, like even be as emotional and unpredictable as we can be, because they're all the AI currently, she says fearfully, can't be. Um, so yeah, we can break the rules of language, and we can just show up as and be as human as we possibly can on the page. And Kate is now gonna tell you, like introduce how, like ways of finding that authentic writer voice.
So before I do that, I just want to tell you a little story about somebody that I came across called Coral Hart, a romance novelist who managed to produce dozens of books last year that they reckon took 45 minutes to produce. And she then went on to sell 50,000 copies of these AI generated books, which might make you go, ooh, that's a good idea. Even if she only sold them for 99p each, that's a lot of money. However, if you look at the reviews, there is not a single positive review. So there's not going to be many people being repeat customers, and I'm fairly certain it's a journalist from what I can work out with a pseudonym. Um, don't think they're going to be getting a lot of repeat sales and making a career out of it. But it just goes to show, doesn't it, that, you can get away with it for a little while sometimes. Right. So, how do you find your author voice and not end up sounding like you've just been churned out of a machine? There isn't an easy, quick solution, unfortunately. You just have to write, and you have to write a lot. And you have to write for yourself and not for anybody else. And that's the hardest thing, I think, because all our lives, we're taught how to write so that we do well in exams. We're taught how to write so that we sound official if we're writing a letter to a business or, a legal document, or, we've got to write to a teacher at our child's school. We're taught how to form those things. When we're at school, we're taught quite rigid structures about how we should write a letter and, a diary entry even. I can remember teaching when I was still in that field. Um, but the secret is to write just for yourself. So journal as much as you can. Write letters to yourself. Write and destroy it if you're worried that the things that you're writing are going to be seen by somebody else. It's only by writing as if you're not writing for anybody else that you're going to really find the way that you enjoy writing, the way that you naturally write. Because I think we all sort of lose our natural voice somewhere in education, which is sad, but also sort of predictable because it's just, it's the way it is, isn't it? So, yeah, journal. Use your personality as much as you can. Once upon a time, if I was writing something for work, whether it was a blog post or an article or, something as seemingly insignificant as a social media post, I wouldn't have used silly words that I use all the time. So I use the word wibble. It's not a word, but it's how I feel sometimes. Sometimes I just feel a bit wibbled. And I'm fairly certain that you can all understand what it means, but I wouldn't have used that a few years ago. Now I do. Because it's part of who I am, it's part of how I write, it's part of how I speak. Now, that said, your author voice, your writer voice isn't always anything like the way you speak, and that's okay. It can have very different feel to it. So you might be quite a shy, introverted person, but you could have a really confident writer voice. And that doesn't make it any less authentic. It's just that we have two voices. We have a voice that we use to speak and a voice that we use to write. And when we say that you've got to find your voice, it's not about how you speak to people. It's about making sure that we get rid of all those structures and what's the word I'm looking for? Like conformity that we've built into our writing over the years so that we can get to the next step of whatever it was that we were trying to achieve. So make sure it's got your personality in. As Jen says, the tone's really important. The rhythm of your writing's really important. And using those quirky things. When Jen was saying, to lean into the things that AI wouldn't be able to do, the first thing that came into my head was it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. One of the most incredible opening lines ever. An AI would not be able to comprehend that because how can it be the best and the worst of times at the same time? That's a contradiction. And yet we all know what that means because it's a human state, isn't it? You can be having a brilliant day and having an awful day at the same time. You can be really happy and be crying at the same time. So just really lean into that humanity. Lean into all the imperfections. I'm not suggesting for a minute that you intentionally let your book go to print or you publish an article or a blog or a newsletter with spelling mistakes. But if you do, don't beat yourself up about it like you used to. It's taken me a long time to get to that point, I have to tell you, because I might not have the same meticulous eye that Jen's got, but I still have a big teacher red pen in my head that wants to go through afterwards. And I always spot it just after I've hit post or just after I've sent the email, always. I can read it through 5 times and then spot it when it's too late. But we're human, and being human is just about the most awesome thing we can be at the minute, I think. It's the thing that's going to make us stand out. It's the thing that's going to make us as irreplaceable as possible. Because I want to read stories and books and experiences and knowledge from people. I don't want to know what the average version of the world is. That's not what I'm here to learn. I want to learn what's happening with you and what you can explain to me that I don't already understand. And to me, there's nothing more valuable than that. It's not necessarily about acquiring knowledge even. It's about human connection. And that's what we're being encouraged to sell off and trade in for a companion that's always there. A man has married his AI. I'm just going to leave that there. Feels like a Jeremy Kyle story. So you'll get an email when we finish, and there's a link to download this, which has just got a bit of an overview of everything that we've discussed so that you've got a record of it if you want. Um, Jen, you were just going to have a quick word before we sign off, weren't you? We've not done bad considering we were a bit late starting. We're not
That's
what.
true, actually. Yeah, not bad at all. It's like we've done it before or something. We haven't. Um, yes, I'm afraid while we have a captive audience, we're going to abuse that and just take a couple of minutes to talk to you about our book writing program, the Book Forge. Um, I will be as short and sweet as I possibly can be, but I'd really appreciate it if you, yeah, held on so we can say goodbye. So the Book Forge is our 12-month non-fiction team program. It we don't want it to sound daunting. Yes, it's 12 months, but it's kind of almost self-paced. You can do it whenever you feel you're ready to. We have two monthly live sessions online where we get together to discuss and share knowledge on one topic each. So Kate and I take it in turns each month to cover a topic. Sometimes it's the same topic if there's overlap, but most months I'm covering the wordy technical stuff, and Kate is covering the well-being for writers content. We have a chat, we share our thoughts on the subject. There are workbooks to go with it for each module that you can again do in your own time. If you like the structure, it works to do the workbook before or after the module, or you can just take in whatever we're saying, ignore it if you want, and then come and do your workbooks in your own time. You can write along with the program if you want. If you want to aim to have your book finished in those 12 months, then it is set out with some logic behind it, is the content of the course. So if you wanted to write it as we're talking about the elements like planning and research and that sort of thing, you can do it along with us. But it's not one of those courses where we say, you'll have finished your book in 12 months. We're just giving you the information that we think might be helpful to get through all the different stages of putting together a non-fiction book, whether that is a self-help book or a general knowledge book or a cookery book, a memoir. So yes, if you would like more information, obviously you can find it on our website, booksmithacademy.com. We are aiming to open our doors again in March, fingers crossed. Yeah, and if you'd like any more information, you'll find it online, unless Kate's got any to add to that now.
Just that we've got a discount code for people who signed up for this. So if you want to use it yourself, if you want to pass it on to somebody that you think might be interested, that's fine. If you put capital B, capital F 20 into the coupon code, then it'll give you 20% discount off the whole course. So it'll take 20% off each month. So yeah, exciting. I feel like we've done quite a lot of spouting at you. I'm going to stop the recording so that you've got some privacy to be able to ask questions and make any comments that you might want to make.